Hello, everyone, and welcome back to another chapter of Experiencer Interviews. And today we have Preston Dennett on board, coming to us from the US. Preston Dennett began investigating UFOs and the paranormal in 1986 when he discovered that his family, friends, and co-workers were having dramatic unexplained encounters. Since then, he has interviewed hundreds of witnesses and investigated a wide variety of paranormal phenomena. He is a field investigator for the Mutual UFO Network, MUFON, a ghost hunter, a paranormal researcher, and the author of 28 books and more than 100 articles on UFOs and the paranormal. Several of his books have been Amazon UFO bestsellers. His articles have appeared in numerous magazines, including Fate, Atlantis Rising, MUFON UFO Journal, Nexus, Paranormal Magazine, UFO Magazine, Phenomena Magazine, Mysteries Magazine, Ufologist, and others. His writing has been translated into several different languages, including German, French, Portuguese, Russian, and Icelandic. He has appeared on numerous radio and television programs, including Midnight in the Desert with Art Bell, Coast to Coast, and also the History Channel's Deep Sea UFOs and UFO Hunters. His research has been presented in the LA Times, the LA Daily News, the Dallas Morning News, and other newspapers. He has taught classes on various paranormal subjects and lectures across the United States. He currently resides in the Southern California region. So thank you so much for coming on.
Thank you, Jan. I am happy to be on. Thanks so much.
It's an honor, sir. Now, I've interviewed your sister-in-law a few months ago, and while she was on, she briefly got into your story and the reason why you got into ufology. So I'm really looking forward to getting into it. Now, when did everything start off for you? How did you get into this field?
Oh gosh, I certainly wasn't looking for it. I kind of got dragged into it involuntarily, kicking and screaming, really. I didn't believe in UFOs or anything paranormal, but I started having weird experiences. I think the first one was shortly after my mom died in 1984. I saw her spirit and did not think ghosts or anything. I just thought I'd lost my mind. But events progressed. It was 1986 that I was watching the news, and the newscasters started talking about a sighting in Alaska by a pilot, a Japanese commercial airline pilot. And later, I found out it was a really well authenticated case with radar returns, multiple witnesses, and so forth. But the news report was very brief, very tongue-in-cheek. They just kind of joked about it, laughed nervously, and moved on. But I was intrigued. Yeah, they showed the pilot, Kenju Toroshi. I thought, this pilot is he lying? Is he hallucinating? What is wrong with him? UFOs aren't real. Why would he say this?
Yeah.
And I remembered my brother, Mark, my older brother, had seen a UFO some years earlier. He tried to tell me. I didn't want to hear it. I was just a, teenager at the time. And when I heard this report in the news, I was still quite young. I was, 21. But it intrigued me. So I asked Mark, tell me about that UFO you saw. And his eyes lit up. He's like, oh. And he described this incredible sighting of him and his two friends chasing this UFO down the street here in Southern California. It was at night. This object was very low, treetop level, very close to his car. They were chasing it along with several other cars. It was a metallic craft, colored lights, a dome on top, totally silent. Really an amazing case. It blew my mind. I'm like, Mark, you're kidding. He's like, no, go ahead, talk to Phil, talk to Greg. Those were his friends. And yeah, I ended up talking to them, of course. And that started the ball rolling. I started, stupid me. I started asking everyone in my family and my friends, my coworkers, and a lot of them looked at me like I was totally nuts, but some didn't. My sister-in-law was like, oh yeah, I saw a UFO, me and my two friends. Like, really? Tell me. Another family friend, she's like, oh yeah, I saw one. My friend was there. And another guy, a good friend, says, oh yeah, me and my girlfriend saw one. But he had missing time. I brought it up at work. The lady I worked with for years is like, oh yeah, me and my whole family saw it. It was darting around. In walks Dorothy. I love Dorothy. She's so unfiltered. And she's like, UFOs. Oh, one followed us home from the library. She had missing time too.
Really?
So I'm like, oh my God, UFOs are real. No, no. Yeah, it was really upsetting actually.
For real? How come? Because your worldview changed?
Yeah, not only changed, it collapsed. I mean, I had to question everything. Because if UFOs were real, and what else had I missed? What else was I being lied to about? I was really mad at some of my family members and friends and stuff. Like, why didn't you tell me? They're like, you wouldn't have believed me. You made it clear that you didn't believe in this stuff.
No, I had
Well,
my dad, when I was able to call in a second UFO over my house, really up close. I had the feeling to go inside and get my parents, and my mom came out fairly quickly to see the craft. It was just above the tree line. My dad, as soon as he saw it, he thought it was a plane because the time he came out, the craft was a bit further away. But from that moment on, he started getting experiences. So, I guess experiencers tend to influence others. So I'm happy that they were able to change your worldview, even though you had one hell of a ride after that.
Yeah, it was tough, and it was tough for a couple of years. I mean, still kind of, it affected me really profoundly. I went to the bookstores and the libraries, checking out books on UFOs, really expecting to find out that, this was swamp gas. There's an explanation for this. It was obvious from the beginning that this had to be real. I knew my family members weren't lying or misperceiving or anything like that, but it was just hard to wrap my head around. I ended up just really going off into the deep end, investigating this. I mean, I bought every book I could find. I joined every UFO group. I became a field investigator for MUFON, Mutual UFO Network. I was dead set on finding out what was happening here. And I haven't looked back. It's been just crazy.
But so what happened when you saw your mother? What did certain events happen to because it was I think Christine said that you saw your mother. Well, if it's too personal, you don't have to answer that, but
no, I don't mind at all. Yeah, it was actually at the service that we were having for. She had died like 2 months earlier, a month, and the whole family was there, friends. This was at someone's house, a friend, and I was standing there waiting for my father to arrive, and he drove up, and I saw her sitting next to him in the car, and I could instantly tell it was her. I mean, he drove right up next to me, and she's got a very good posture. She has a certain way of sitting. She was, a really beautiful woman, and I just couldn't believe my eyes, and I stared intently, not taking my eyes off. There were people all around. No one saw her, or at least they didn't say anything. Well, I didn't say anything either. But yeah, she was about 3 feet away from me when she just kind of pixelated away. And I'm like, oh my gosh, I am so sad. I am seeing things. And it was following that. In the months, actually, about a year later, I started having dreams that were very intense. And, I've never been a huge dreamer. Well, I am now. But I have dreams like everyone else. But these were different. I would wake up and she'd walk into my room and I'd wake up. I'd sit up in bed. I'm like, Mom, oh my God, what is going on? Aren't you dead? What's going on? This is crazy. And she'd be like, no, it's fine. It's fine. she didn't normally speak or anything, but she just kind of smiled at me and let me know that she's all right. And then I would wake up for real. I'm like, oh my God, that's confusing. And it kept happening because I was so devastated. I mean, I was falling asleep crying. I would wake up crying. I loved her.
Yeah.
And I didn't believe in life after death. But having her come into my room like that over and over again in this sort of lucid dream or pre-lucid dream, I knew it was her. I knew it was her. And yet it couldn't be because there was no such thing as ghosts in life after death. So I was really having my whole belief system severely challenged. And that's when I started having out-of-body experiences. Yeah, 1986, same time I started investigating UFOs, I found out that you can have out-of-body experiences and that there's exercises you can do. Robert Monroe's books was what really started it for me.
Gateway course, is that it?
Yep. I didn't take that. I just read his books.
Okay.
I couldn't afford the Gateway course.
I tried it. Yeah, but okay, continue. Yeah, cool.
And this also takes a lot of time. It was all the way across the country. But I read his books and started reading all the other books. I'm like, this sounds really scary. This sounds really interesting, though. I mean, anyone can do this. And so I started doing his exercises that he outlines in the end of his book, which are really simple. It's meditation, it's visualizations, affirmations. And they worked. Boy, did they work. It took me about just barely 2 months before I had my first OBE. And it was amazing. And then I had another and then another. I'm like, okay, let's do this. And I'm telling everyone in my family, I have 5 brothers and sisters. And I'm like, I'm going out of body. UFOs are real. Like, Preston's gone off the deep end. What's wrong with you? I'm like, no, for real. I'm going out of body for real. And it changed my life more. Oh, I'm still having these OBEs. It's the best part of my life. I love it.
How do you feel when you're out of body? Because I might have had an OBE once because I remember going through the roof and into space, but everything went really, really fast. So are you like localized? Or are you staying in one place? Do you go to places?
Yeah, well, I mean, it evolved. Initially, I had one experience that was really terrifying. I thought I died. That was like my 3rd one. But the first few, I was so excited. I would get so excited, I'd be like, yay, I did it. And I just pop out, I'd be, yeah. And then boom, you go right back in. And it took me a year, literally a year of doing this before I could stay out of my body for more than 5 to 10 seconds. And I'm like, okay, just calm down, because you find yourself out of your body and it's shocking. And you feel normal, but you're very light, you're very airy. It can be a little bit hard to move and see at first. Okay. But I calmed down and I'm like, okay. And I learned how to move by sheer willpower and started walking through walls, exploring the house, floating above the house, going to people's houses in the neighborhood or, family and friends and stuff. And just bit by bit built up my courage and my abilities. And you definitely do go places, and you fly around, you can walk through walls, and eventually you get pulled to the other side. And that's actually kind of the rule. It's hard to stay on Earth a little bit.
Okay.
You get pulled right over to the upper dimensions, the astral dimensions, I would call it, because that's really where the astral body belongs. That's its true home.
Did you see a silver cord attached to you?
Not for years and years and years. Oh. And I was reading about other people. I'm like, they're all seeing their silver cord. What's wrong with me? They're all seeing their spirit guides. I'm alone. And I would read all these books. I'm like, well, if they can do it, so can I. So that kind of became my method of operation. I'd be like, well, this person rescued a lost soul. This person saw their deceased loved ones. This person, visited their spirit guides or learned about past lives or went to a healing temple or the Akashic library. And so there's all this stuff you can do. And I'm like, silver cord, let's do that. Because the really best way to do out-of-body experiences and astral travel is to set an intention, have a plan. Because when you pop out of body, it's very disorienting, and it's a new kind of state of consciousness. And if you don't have a plan, it's easy to slip back into a dream or a lucid dream or right back into your body.
Oh.
So I'm like, popped out of body. I'm like, and that was my intention. Silver cord. And finally, one day I popped out of body and I'm like, what is this? And there was this hose just meandering all over me. And I'm kind of wrapped up in it. It's this thick silver hose, like a fire hose.
Really?
I'm like, wow, it's bright. What is this? This is really cool. And I'm kind of untangle myself from it and I'm following it and I'm going, oh, it goes into my body. Silver cord. And that was the first time.
Well, that's amazing.
I just saw it recently, just a month ago, and popped out in my living room. I'm walking around. I'm like, what's this? It's the silver cord. And I looked at it. It's going down into my chest, actually. I started feeling it. And I'm like, wow, look at this. It's very soft and silky. And I'm like, well, this is actually not one solid cord. It's a million tiny little energetic filaments. Really cool. It's just, wow.
Did you feel like people that I've interviewed, they would feel the density of the wood or the walls going through it? Did you feel something similar?
Oh, yeah. Yeah. And this can depend. Initially, it was very much so. I remember walking through the wall. And it's kind of like diving into water. You kind of feel the surface tension, but it's much thicker. So it's like diving into, I don't know, something that's thicker than water.
Yellow? No, that's a bit too hard.
But something like that, right?
But
yeah, and you feel it as you walk through it. And you not only feel it on the surface, you feel it throughout your body. And it's different for each kind of material you go through. And I would always close my eyes because it's very, like, a little scary, kind of. I mean, initially it was. But finally, I'm flying around. I'm like, oh, there's a brick wall. Let's go through that. And I'm coming up to it. I'm like, I'm going to leave my eyes open. Just going to open them. You can't be hurt when you're out of body. So let's just do it. And I kept my eyes open. It was hard, but I did it. And I walked through it. And I'm like, wow, you can see everything, all the little particles. And sometimes if your density is too low, you're vibrating at a lower rate. I'm not sure how this happens. You bounce right off of it. I'm like flying towards the wall and boing. And other times you just slide right through it and you don't feel a thing. If you're like higher vibration.
Yeah. Well, that makes sense. Never thought about that.
Yeah, it took me a while to figure it out, actually. Okay. Finally, someone alerted me to it. Because another thing I was trying to do was like move objects. And other people are doing this. I'm like, I can't do it. And I try to appear in front of people and they never see me. And finally, I'm talking about it on the show and a guy calls in. He's like, well, here's how you do it. You just got to lower your vibrational rate and you should be able to move objects, which I still haven't done yet. But I did fairly recently, a year or two ago, and several times since, have appeared as an apparition in front of somebody.
Okay.
She saw me. I couldn't believe it. She lives in Florida. She's a contactee.
Okay.
And she's described some of her own OBEs. I'm like, well, this is a good experiment. Maybe she'll see me. Because my brother didn't, my friend didn't, my sister-in-law. I'm like, hello, I'm here. You feel really ghostly. It's odd and a kind of, I don't know, it's just a weird feeling to be in front of someone and not have them see you.
Okay.
So I go to Florida. Here I'm in California. I'm like, okay, I'm going to Dolly's house. Now we go. You know, you kind of set the intention. And I was flying really fast, and then boom, you kind of teleport there. And you just, boom, you're there. And I landed. And I'm looking for her. I'm like, gosh, she should be around here. And she walked into the room. I'm like, oh, there she is. And I'm looking at her. And suddenly she whirls around and looks right at me in the eye. And her eyes get real wide. she's on the phone, right? She's talking on the cell phone. She says, I can't talk now. I'm being robbed. I'm like, oh my God. And that pulled me right back into my body, because any shock or strong emotion will pull you back. So she calls me the next day and we're talking, and I'm like, well, she's not telling me she was robbed. Maybe I was wrong. Because I think she would have told me that right off the bat. But we're talking, and finally she says, oh, I saw you last night. I'm like, you did? She's like, yeah, you came to me out of body. Do you remember? I'm like, of course I remember. I saw you see me. What did you say? Because you said something to me. And she says, yeah, I was on the phone. And I told you, I can't talk now. I'm talking to Rob. I'm like, oh, you're talking to Rob. I thought you said I'm being robbed. But it was close enough where it was confirmation.
Okay. Wow, that's amazing. I got chills, man. Wow.
Yeah, that gave me chills. And she came, here's just a little quick end note to all of this. Turnabout is fair play. I'm in my bed sleeping when suddenly my room fills with light. And I wake up and there she is, Dolly, in full golden light. Just huge. I mean, radiating light all around her, looking gorgeous. I'm like, wow, Dolly, it's you. She's grinning ear to ear. Like, amazing. And she's really good at it. She's like, she's taken me on a few tours. She comes in my room and like grabs my hand, like, let's go. I'm like, oh my God, I am ready. Let's do this.
See, this type of thing should be taught in schools.
Absolutely.
The fear of death would be gone forever for everyone.
There's so many benefits. People are like, isn't that scary? I'm like, well, yeah, it's a little scary. Is it dangerous? Nope, it's not. There's a lot of talk about like, this is dangerous. You'll get possessed, you get locked out of your body. No, that's absolutely untrue. I've read every book I can find on this. And while some people do occasionally have what I would call scary experiences, confrontations with hostile entities, which I've had, I couldn't find any evidence of any real danger, really at all. And in fact, I found the opposite. And there's so many benefits, and knowledge of life after death is absolutely one of them. And all it takes is one experience. And you're like, wow, you exist beyond your body. But also you can fly. You get to meet deceased loved ones. And there is nothing like, boy, when I met my mom, I went out of my mind with joy. It was amazing. And I found, this is absolutely true, 20 plus cases of physical healings. You can physically heal yourself of illness and injury by having an out-of-body experience.
Really?
This is fairly well documented. There's a number of near-death accounts where people have been cured of all kinds of diseases, cancer, and this is true of just your regular OBE as well. A guy was cured of multiple sclerosis. Another guy was cured of sarcoidosis, a liver disease. Robert Monroe had a healing. He had some, I think it was hip pain. He traced it to a past life where he was killed by a spear. So yeah, all kinds of healing events. You can learn about your life mission. You can visit enlightened masters. The stuff you can do, it's unbelievably spiritually transforming. Oh, and another great benefit that actually affects your day-to-day here in the physical world is psychic powers.
Really?
Because I did have one really amazing psychic event when I was like 9 years old, where I knew all the answers to a game show. I mean, I literally knew them all. My sister and I were like just rolling on the floor with laughter because I knew everything that was going to happen. But I didn't know how to categorize it. I didn't know what was going on. I just thought it was funny and weird. But then I started having these OBEs, and man, oh man, that activated your psychic abilities. I started having lots of precognition, lots of telepathy, lots of clairvoyance, and it still goes on. And it's so much fun when you're like, oh my gosh, this is going to happen today. I just know, Chris has got a haircut, or I'm going to get a present. I know I am. or my brother-in-law, my sister's ex-boyfriend, stole a wallet, and I knew he did it. He was a bad boy. Shame on it. I knew it because I saw it happen. And it's just amazing. I love the psychic stuff.
So you're definitely an experiencer. What, being out of body, have you had the chance of meeting like ETs? I know some do, but in your case, did you see anything on the other side?
Yeah, I sure have. It took a while. Once I started investigating UFOs, I started having UFO sightings and contact as well. And looking back, there's some clues that might have been going on a little bit longer. Very hard to say. It's quite vague in my case. It's absolutely in my family. I mean, my sister-in-law saw grays. My nephew saw a UFO. My other nephew saw a UFO and a humanoid. My other sister-in-law saw ETs. So it's in my family. But yeah, once I was out of body and I'm like, all right, what do I want to do? Let's go to the other side. That's where all the fun is. And how I do that is, I pop out of body and I'm looking around and I'm like, wow, it's so beautiful. Everything's kind of glowy and it looks just really crisp and pure when you're out of body. It's just really pretty. So I'm like floating there above my house, like, what did I want to do? What do I want to do? I'm like, oh yeah, other side. And how I do it is I fly straight up super fast. And the environment starts to change and you start going to this foggy realm. That's sort of, I guess, the veil between the worlds.
Okay.
And it's all foggy and very misty. And then boom, you pop out into hopefully the higher realms. I've been exploring the lower realms lately. We can get into that if you want.
Oh, that's amazing.
But yeah, the higher realms are like just beautiful gardens and sparkling with light, and it's gorgeous nature scenes, and couldn't be in a bad mood if you wanted to. It's heavenly. I'm not a religious guy, but I would call it heaven for sure. But I'm flying there towards it, and suddenly I see, like, what's that? These two little dark spots, and this is in the foggy realm. I'm like, huh? And it's getting closer and closer. And I'm like, boy, that almost looks like a person looking at me. And as I get real close, I can see these are big dark eyes, almond shaped. And then boom, I'm right up next to them, whoever this is. And it's a darn gray alien. And I'm fly right by him. And he is about 3 feet away from me. And it's like staring at me. I should have stopped. Now I regret it. But it shocked me. And he's looking right at me and watches me go by. And I'm like, oh my God, it's an alien. It was, really shocking. And so I wasn't quite prepared for that. I did not expect it at all. Now I regret not stopping, like, hey guy, hey dude, what's up? That would have been really cool.
So that was your first time meeting a gray face to face?
Yeah. Well, no. Maybe. Because I did go out of body once and I'm like, I want to see an alien. And one appeared and it wasn't a gray. It was this weird kind of dog-faced alien where its legs bent backwards and it was just different looking. And I've always wondered, did I kind of create that? Was that a mental projection? Just not sure.
Yeah.
And there was another time, and I don't normally talk about this a lot, but I will tell you, because I've had a lot of UFO sightings. And one time this is when I was doing a lot of out-of-body travel, and I could be essentially, anyone would think I was asleep, but I wasn't. Because when you're doing this OBEs, it's really hard to surprise. I mean, you're kind of aware of what's going on around you when you're asleep. You're walking around the house, and you can see stuff even when you're lying in bed. You become a very kind of light sleeper, might be one way of putting it, but you can sense things around you in a way that's different. And I was lying there in bed asleep when suddenly I kind of woke up because a cat was walking across my bed. That's what it felt like.
Mm.
I'm like, well, that's weird because I don't have a cat. So what? And I felt these footsteps. Well, actually just two. It wasn't four. It was two steps walking across the foot of my bed. And so I quietly opened my eyes. And there was something standing next to my bed. And my room was really dark. I like to sleep in real darkness. And so I couldn't see it clearly, but whatever it was thin. And I'm like, oh my God. And the instant I saw that, it darts out of my room really fast, faster than a human can move. My heart goes bump, 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 bump. And I'm like, oh. And I turn around, I turn over in bed and I go directly to sleep.
Oh.
Which is kind of odd, but I've interviewed a lot of people and they're like, yeah, an alien came in my room and what did I do? I went back to sleep. I'm like, you're kidding. Why would you do that? They're like, you don't understand. You don't react the way you think you would. You're sort of influenced, perhaps. I'm like, well, now I get it. I absolutely get it because it happened to me.
That reminds me of I didn't know anything about ETs, so like growing up like in northern Canada, you don't hear about this stuff. Like the normal like maybe Roswell type of documentary, nothing major. But in 2007, 2008, I was living in a second-story apartment. During the summer, it was fairly hot. The windows were open. So I wake up around 6 a.m. And normally I sleep on my stomach, but this time I wake up on my back and I'm just looking around. Then I realize there's something floating maybe a few feet away, maybe like 6 foot off the floor, but in front of my face. And I start concentrating on it. And I'm seeing this dark outline. So I'm following the outline, but the outline, what I called an upside down guitar pick. So it's basically the head of the grade that you've got right beside you. It's the same. So it's a guitar pick. So I had a guitar pick as a framework for this, what I was seeing. It was sort of semi-transparent. So I'm looking through it, but I concentrate in the center of the head. And at the top, instead of having these tear-shaped eyes, I get these perfectly round eyes with a very long, like, the chin, I suppose. But I didn't know a thing about ET, so I thought it was a weird ghost. And I was looking at it for like 30 seconds. And then I thought, okay, it can't do anything to me. So for some reason, I just turn around and hug my girlfriend and fall asleep. So from that moment on, I've had like these visions of things happening to my family that would appear in front of my face. I would have, in that same bedroom, like a month later, I would have a female voice tell me at night, maybe an inch away from my head, my ear right here, that I'd be an uncle and my parents' grandparents, to having my brother call up 3 months later and telling me his wife's pregnant after like years of trying to get pregnant. They couldn't.
Wow.
She almost died because they injected her with too much hormones. Her belly swelled up like this. She almost died. So we thought nothing's going to happen. So, and like if 3 months after the female voice telling me I'll be an uncle, my brother calls up. So I've been getting this stuff. So I was wondering, what was your trigger? I'm thinking, could seeing your mother in your dad's car be the trigger that brought you on this path?
I think that was partly it. It was really, I think, a series of events because I was a hardcore skeptic. It was really hard to break down my armor. And it's a good thing I was young because I think that helped for sure. And I've always been kind of a seeker. I've always been kind of a spiritual guy. So I think that also helped.
Okay.
I'm really interested. I loved science. I was all about science and truth and knowledge. So yeah, it was really a series of events. And once I really, really wanted to see this stuff for myself. I'm the kind of guy who's like, well, your story is interesting and I think you're telling the truth and I believe you, but I want to see it. And sometimes people say, oh, he's a UFO believer. I'm like, don't call me that. I don't believe anything anymore. I tried that, having a belief system and then having it completely collapse on you was so painful. I'm like, I'm not even going there again. I am not going to believe in anything. I'm going to know it or not.
Okay.
And
Okay.
that's kind of been the way I've operated ever since my belief system collapsed, because it was tough.
Did you have a backlash when you came out with all of this? Because at least I chose to come out in the US instead of in Canada. And when I tried to share with some of my stuff with my coworkers, since I really thought I was going to lose my job for a while. And some of the people that I work with, they hardly speak to me anymore. So did you have anything of that happen to you?
A little bit. I've been very fortunate. My first boss didn't believe in UFOs, but he was very open to the idea. And in fact, some TV show wanted to do a segment on me, and he said they wanted to come to my office. So I told my boss, and he's like, only if they pay you. And so he made them actually, pay me to be on their show. And he was very open. And a bunch of my coworkers had seen UFOs, so they were mostly fine with it. And some were kind of gave you that sort of sideways glance and like, you're crazy. And yeah, it did split my family right down the middle. My dad was furious. It's like, is this because I never took you to church? I'm like, what are you talking about? No, Dad, read this book. And he wouldn't. He absolutely would not look at the UFO evidence. And skeptics are often that way. They're like, don't bother me with the facts. I don't want to know. And I get it, because I was there at one point. It's uncomfortable to change your belief system. This is what I would call a core belief. People like have core beliefs about religion and politics and sex even, and just something that really affects you and your identity and your worldview. And this is one of them. And so people find it very difficult to face this subject. And my eldest brother was also like, UFOs aren't real. The stars are too far away. Don't you? I'm like, yeah, I know exactly how far away they are. I took a lot of astronomy courses. They are far away, but the fact is the UFOs are here. And the evidence is overwhelming. My brother Mark, he believed because he had a sighting. My brother Stephen was very resistant, but I kept, I'm not a preacher. I'm not going to try to convert anyone to ufology. But every now and then I just can't help it, especially with, the ones I love. I feel like they need to know the truth. This is important. And I finally brought him around. Both my sisters were already open to the idea, so they got on board. But no, all my bosses, I've had a number of them, have been very nice. Some of the coworkers are skeptical, and they'll later come to my office privately and be like, well, I did have this experience, and I never knew what to make of it, but could you tell me? And I'm like, dude, that is a UFO. So I've been very fortunate, and it's gotten a lot better now.
See, like I said earlier, when my dad was able to see the UFO, even though a bit far away, he started having shadow beings, taps on his body at night. One night he woke up. He was sleeping in the one of the rooms in the basement because he had a bad cold. He didn't want to wake up my mom, and as soon as he woke up during the night, he had a 4-inch golden orb come in through the basement window, fly from one end of the room to the other, and whisked out, went through the window. And even not too long ago, my mom passed away, and now he's living in another city. And he calls up and he said that what appeared to him, he woke up at night and there was a weird looking clown beside his bed. And he said it looked like a clown, but it didn't feel like a clown. It was, how it tried to portray itself wasn't totally a clown. I said, Dad, you saw a gray or something. So I thought, good for you. So yeah, we do.
That's a thing. I did a whole research study on that. The alien clown connection. Because I kept hearing cases.
Yeah.
And it turned out Bud Hopkins had cases. And another English researcher. I started digging deeper. This is absolutely a thing. I once brought it up at a UFO support group. I'm like, how do you guys feel about clowns? Boy, it's like setting off an atomic bomb.
A friend of mine, she's in her 60s. She's an experiencer. I won't get into the details, but her son would complain at the age of 5, would tell her, please tell these stupid clowns to get out of my bedroom. So he was ticked off because there were too many clowns in the bedroom. So it's super funny that, some of them are so playful. So did you do C5s later on down the road, try to call in UFOs?
Yes, absolutely. I did an interview with this guy who worked for NBC once, Arnie Weiler. And he was down in Santa Monica doing this little light show where they, made a peacock's tail out of lights, computerized lights, to sort of do, NBC as the peacock logo. And so it was a publicity stunt sort of thing. And he's working with this other guy, Rick Liebert. And they turn on they set all the lights up. It looks like a disc almost, with colored lights all around the edge. Turn it on, and these 2 UFOs come swooping down. And Arnie was like, oh my God, look, UFOs. And he points it out to Rick Liebert, who's the special effects guy. And Rick Liebert just kind of goes, yep, they always show up when I do this kind of thing. I'm like, wow. I ended up interviewing Arnie about this. I'm like, can you put me in touch with Rick Liebert? And he said, sure. And I interviewed Rick. And he's like, yeah, this does happen. And he told me about another incident in San Diego where they used a green argon laser on top of what was then the tallest building in San Diego. This is late 70s. Turned it on, and it's playing in tune to Pink Floyd, another, a rock station. It was a publicity stunt, and it worked. It attracted attention all right. This chevron-shaped UFO drops down out of the sky. There was actually 2 of them, but one came really close, like 20 feet over the building, and just moved silently overhead. And all 10 people who were doing the stunt saw it. I'm like, wow, this is amazing. So I wrote this article for UFO Universe, calling all UFOs. This is well before the whole CE5 movement, had any traction at all. And then Stephen Greer started his project, CSETI, Center for Study of Extraterrestrial Intelligence, to do specifically CE5 work, calling down UFOs. And he came to LA and he was going to speak. And he's charging like $300. I'm like, oh, shoot, I'm not paying that. There's no way. And the newspaper called me up and they're like, we'll pay your way. We have no idea why we're doing this, but we'll pay your way if you write an article. I'm like, oh, wow, amazing. So that was a weird coincidence, which abound in this field. I could go on and on about these weird coincidences.
Yeah, I don't believe in coincidences. There's definitely something. I tend to say people were like, at least experiencers are like chess pieces. They're being moved around. They've got this specific work to do. You're definitely doing your work. You're on a path, brother.
I feel it. Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
So at any rate, I go to the meeting and Stephen Greer is like, here's how you call down a UFO. Here's this case from Preston Dennett. I'm like, whoa. And he tells, that first case of the peacock. And he says, here's another excellent case from Preston Dennett. These were his top 2 cases on how to call down UFOs using lights. I'm like, wow. And that is amazing. And he cited a few other cases. And he says, we're going to go out and we're going to call down UFOs. I'm like, oh, let's do this. And this was in Canoga Park, a little hotel in Canoga Park, not far from where I lived at that time. And that evening, a group of 40 of us or so went out into, well, you can't really go into the wilderness outside of LA, but a slightly wild area. And no sooner did we get there, honestly, we had just started settled down and we're setting up and someone screams, what's that? And we all look straight up and at the zenith, straight up. I'm going to say it's many thousands of feet high. Hard to say for sure, but at least 25 to 30,000 feet, way up there was this huge light, about the size of a quarter full moon, large, and kind of this milky yellow white, very oddly shaped, and it was moving across the sky. And I'm looking at it, well, it's clearly not a satellite. Satellites are little tiny star-like objects. It's not a balloon, it's not a plane. I'm like, ding, 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 ding. It's none of these things. And it winked out. I'm like, oh, wow, that was a UFO. And I had just, right before I had gone to that meeting, literally about a month earlier, I had gone on vacation with my family up to the Crater Lake area. And me and Mark, my brother, and my sister-in-law, Christy Kisara, who was on your show, stayed up late. And we had brought this really powerful flashlight. We're going to call down UFOs. And we were just staying late, talking around the campfire. Everyone else had gone to sleep. And Mark shouts out, I saw a light. Give me the flashlight, quick. And Christy quickly, handed it over, and Mark shines it up and blinks it. And this light, we're all looking at, it blinks back at us. I'm like, oh, and it was bright and bigger than a star by several magnitudes. I mean, way bigger, brighter than Venus. And he blinks the flashlight twice, and it blinks back twice. And that was all it took for me to know that this was an intelligence and not, it was a UFO with aliens. And they, Mark and Christy will tell the story, and they say it blinked again. And I'm like, I'm pretty sure it was just twice, because I've trained myself to be an observer. But maybe it did, I don't know. But that happened right before I joined CSETI. And after joining CSETI, we went out the next night after that first sighting. And this time there was just a group of about 20 of us, not even. We had these weird strobe lights coming over our group. We were all in meditation, eyes closed. I'm like, who's flashing a flashlight in my eyes? How rude. And then it happens again. I'm like, happened a third time. And I finally opened my eyes, and everyone's going, looking around. There were these weird strobing lights that were different. I mean, I don't want to say you could physically feel it, but almost. It's different. And that's how it started. We ended up going for years, a good 5 years out every month or two. And we see anomalous lights fairly regularly. And I had a bunch of really good sightings, calling them down that way, and would later do it again. I remember the TV show Encounters wanted to do an episode, and I was investigating a wave of sightings over Topanga Canyon. And so we went there to call down UFOs, and sure enough, one came down for the show. Really? And I did it for the Travel Channel too. It was so funny because everything was set up when we're there, and the camera people are like, all right, well, the batteries are almost low. We need to change the batteries and change the film. And so they shut off their cameras, and whoosh, these two UFOs come swooping down. Oh, I was so mad. Everyone was like, oh my God. Camera people were especially upset though.
They knew. That's so funny.
Yeah.
There's a lot of cases where the batteries get drained and whatnot.
Yeah, those darn UFOs were waiting for the cameras to shut off.
Well, I don't know why, but they know somehow. When I used to date a British abductee, a gray abductee, and her great grandfather was knighted and was a brigadier and in the Navy or whatnot. But we dated for an entire year, and during that time, my phone was tapped and whatnot. And I didn't think things would move in the heavens. That's how I didn't know anything. And the second night we were at my place, we were in the front lawn. This was about 9:45-ish up north. So, the sun was a bit lower, but it was like between dark and light. And 9:45, we called in a craft. It came in, it flew maybe like 30 feet above the power lines, maybe 10 feet wide. Because from my point of view, it came at an angle to be like, to make sure that we saw it. No sound, a a cross between an egg and a watermelon shaped, let's say. Not perfectly round, but slightly elongated, orange red in color, no sound. And it just glided in front of us. And everybody was outside. The neighbors' kids were outside. Everyone was outside. It was warm. Nobody saw it except us. And it lasted for like a minute. And I believe that time it was thanks to her, because she had contacts with the Greys as a kid. And the next week I was at my parents' house and I did a CE5 on my own. And at 10 o'clock-ish, I decided to go inside thinking, oh, okay, they came for her. They didn't come for me, whatever, like full ego. And I speak to my mom and dad for like 5 minutes. And as soon as I come out, I step off the front porch onto the pavement or the cement. And as soon as I step on it, I get the feeling to look up. And as soon as I look up, the UFO flies over my head. So how do they know?
Yeah, they keep very close watch. They are, well, we call them the watchers.
Yeah.
They are on top of things for sure. And they do have the ability to show themselves to one or two or whoever they want, even in a crowd of people. And I've talked to people who've had this experience. One kid was a teenager and he was with his friends. And he's like, oh my God, look, a UFO. I'm like, where? He's like, right there. What are you talking about? Where? It's super obvious. I'm like, I don't see it. He's like, it's right there. And they put their faces together. No, only he could see it. And I've heard this many times, actually. It's very bizarre.
Okay. So yeah, you've had an amazing life so far. So I'm really happy you got into these, because a lot of it for me was new today. So thank you. We've got so you've got a new book coming out called the Wondrous 25 True UFO Encounters. So this book came out this year, right?
That's right. Yep.
So let me see. So let's get into some of the questions regarding that book. Did you have any cases regarding UFO landings?
Oh yeah, absolutely. Some really, really interesting cases. One really interesting case occurred up in Northern California to this guy named Gary. He and his friends would often go up to this little hangout outside of San Dimas. There was a golf course, and beyond the golf course, there were these mountains. And there was a dirt road that went up to this little valley, sort of in the mountains there, which dipped down, and it was a secret little hangout for them. And they'd go up there, drink beers, or just hang out with their friends or whatever. These were all, 18, 19, 20, 21, 22-year-olds. And there was, I think, 5 of them. And they went up there one evening just to hang out. It's a long switchback dirt road that's very rough. And they drive up there, and it's just about dusk, slightly later. And they get up there to park, and there's something on the far side of the field, and it's covering one end to the other. So it's a good 100 feet long. Couldn't be a helicopter. There's no helicopters this big. Can't be a truck. Because no truck could possibly get up there. It couldn't be anything that drove there. It had to have come from the sky, but there's no way anything that size could land there. There's just no way. And it had big, big bright lights on it, super bright, and they could see people. Tall, there was a sort of a scaffolding around the circumference, and there were people walking on it, and all they could see were silhouettes. And so they hop out of the car, and they're looking at it, freaking out, because what could this possibly be? They're thinking, is this military? There's nothing up there. Why would they be there? It's not a helicopter. It's not making any noise. And who are these people? And they look kind of tall. And we're trying to figure out, and the guy I interviewed, starts walking away from the car. All the others were too afraid. He's starting to walk sort of to the left and get a little closer to see if he can get a better vantage point. And that's when one of these figures, who had ignored them up to this point, started walking towards them. And mind you, it's only a few hundred feet away. And this guy is sort of marching in a very concerted way, just boom, 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 coming towards them. And they're like, hey, who are you? what's going on? Why are you here? Who are you? And this figure would not answer. And they're all asking, like, what are you doing here? And the guy just kept walking towards them in an almost threatening way, not answering. And that caused them to panic. All the other people get in the car and like, get in the car, Gary, get in the car. And so he ran back to the car and hopped in, and they drove off and called the police. And they said, there's something up there. We'll tell you exactly where it is. Could you please investigate? And the police officer agreed. And they called the officer back an hour or two later. He says, yeah, I went up there. There's nothing there. I don't know what you guys saw, but there's nothing there. And they went up the next morning and investigated, and there was no evidence of any large object. But they said it looked like it was, maybe it could have been a foot or two above the field. But I don't know, hard to say. They're convinced it wasn't military. And I don't think it was either, because it just makes no sense. There's no real military bases in that area. It's a hard location to sort of get to, not only by road, but by air, because there's trees and it's a mountain. And it's just a weird case of a UFO landing. Perhaps they stopped for repairs or something, or I don't know.
Okay. Now, do any cases of whistleblowers contacting you?
Yes. And in fact, I was able to put like 3 cases in this book that I had been sitting on for a while because they just didn't fit some of my other books. And one, for example, involves this gentleman who contacted me from the hospital. He was very elderly with a chronic disease and about to pass away. And he really wanted to do his part for disclosure. So boy, that was so humbling. And he told me this incredible story, which occurred at Edwards Air Force Base. And when he mentioned Edwards, I'm like, almost did a double back flip, because Edwards, if you know anything about it, Edwards Air Force Base in California is neck deep involved in UFOs. Has a wide variety of encounters there. Sightings, landings, crash retrievals, reverse engineering, alien meetings. I mean, if it's happened at Edwards. And he was a civilian contractor for the military and was doing a job there and was walking along the base with his employer by a hangar, which was just, 50 feet away or so. And the hangar had a giant window, which was open, and he looks through the window because he hears this deep thrumming noise, which was kind of very low and vibrating. Looks through the window and sees a UFO. It's small, about the size of a small sports car, shiny, bright silver, no markings on it, and it's levitating, it's floating. It's got little cables attached to it, but it's absolutely floating above the ground. And he turns to his employer and says, "Hey, what's that?" And his employer turns and looks and gets pale and wide-eyed and says, "Shh, don't talk. Keep walking." It's like, no, really, what is it? And he got really angry. He says, "Shut up. I can't talk about it. We weren't supposed to see it." And would not talk about it. Absolutely refused to say a single word for over a year. And finally, a year goes by, and this same employer calls the guy I interviewed back and says, "I really need you for a job. This is an emergency. You're the only one who can do it." And the guy I interviewed says, "No, I'm not doing it. There's no way I'm doing it unless you tell me what we saw." So they got into a little bit of an argument, but the guy said, "Fine, I'll tell you, but you cannot tell anyone. This is, absolutely got to be secret." And the guy agreed. And he said, "Oh, fine, just tell me." And the employer said, "Well, it was not a UFO, what you saw. It was actually reverse engineered alien technology. That was something we built using technology from the ETs. And it is a craft, and it's operated on the principle of counter-rotating magnetics. It creates a magnetic field outside the craft, sort of like a gravity wave, which pulls the craft in the desired direction." So that's it in a nutshell. But yeah, one of my favorite whistleblower cases next to the other one, which is also really cool.
Okay, can you get into that?
Oh, I'd love to. Yeah, because it's a really famous incident in UFO history. In 1967, I think it was March 1967, a bunch of UFOs came down over Malmstrom Air Force Base in Montana and shut down nearly 20 intercontinental ballistic nuclear tipped missiles. Shut them down. And this was first publicized by Robert Salas, Captain Robert Salas. And he's gone public. He had a lot of attacks on his character and debunkers attacking him and so forth. There were other witnesses. And the guy I interviewed saw it on TV, this incident being portrayed. He's like, oh, well, I was there. I guess it's okay to talk, because he had signed an NDA, a non-disclosure agreement, and he was threatened and so forth not to talk. But he's like, he's quite elderly. He's like, well, fine, I'm just going to talk. Tried to contact some UFO researchers, none of who seemed to interested. He found me. I think I was the third one he contacted. He's like, are you interested in my story? I'm like, yeah, definitely. His name is Mel Hansen. He was there, and he was, Robert Salas didn't see anything. Mel did. He was on site as working in security while his team was underground repair, doing maintenance work on one of the missiles. When suddenly, he said it was a really quiet night, very dark, and suddenly all sounds stop and everything's just this weird silence. And he looks up, there's this huge object over the missile, and he can't quite tell the shape. It's dark, but it's blocking out the stars, and it's very low. And then the missile goes offline, and it immediately goes back online with a diesel generator. And then that goes offline. And they have another fail-safe. It goes back online with battery power. Okay. And that goes offline. And so, two fail-safes failed. And by this point, he's on the phone, or the radio rather, with the people back at the base, the proper base, which is a good hour away by Jeep, because all these missile sites are widely separate and independent systems, by the way. They are not connected to each other, and yet all of them went down. And they're like, we'll be there soon. Don't get out of the Jeep, just stay there. He did get out of the Jeep. He wanted to see it closer. Okay. And yeah, he saw this object, and finally it took off. The security people came and they just marched him, or drove him back to the base. He was given a debriefing saying, you didn't see anything. You are not to talk about this. If you breathe one single word, you will lose your job. You will be punished to the full extent of the law. And he didn't say a word. I told only his team. And really not even then. He told his best friend, who was a member of the team. And they would occasionally talk about it in private. But after they all passed away and he was, looking at the end of his life, he's like, well, screw it. It's on TV, I'm talking. So it's an amazing case. Yeah. Or I think it was, people have said, this is an alien threat. I'm like, no, this was not a threatening move. This was a slap across the wrist. What are you doing? Why are you messing around with nuclear power? Don't you see how dangerous? That's the number one message contactees get. And this was a demonstration of that.
Yeah, well, these deathbed confessions are amazing, though. I think that there was one that Richard Dolan had that he talked about, and he did a video with. I thought that was amazing. Are you aware if these TR3Bs, if they had some form of afterburner attached to it?
I believe they do. They can, this is very concerning to me, because these craft can appear to be a UFO, making only a silent, low buzz, and people think. And I started looking at all my reports of like triangular craft, because I had a contactee tell me, well, UFO aliens don't really fly triangular craft. They're saucer shaped, they're cigar shaped, they're egg shaped, they're cylindrical shaped, or manta ray, chevrons, boomerangs, not triangles.
Okay.
I'm like, that can't possibly be true.
Yeah.
And it turns out I have very few. And I think they are some triangular shaped, but they're not quite the triangle we're seeing with these TR3Bs. So
I did, when I was dating that British abductee, we were invited by this team of investigators north of northern Quebec. We're in the woods, and we a certified UFO hotspot, and police officers were there, and a whole bunch of other people, and someone that used to work with Bud Hopkins, or no, David Jacobs, sorry. And so we did a C5, and nothing happened during that night. We thought, okay, well, I thought, wouldn't it be funny if at 11:11 a UFO would fly over us? So from that moment on, we sort of forgot of what I said. And so we were on a hill, and we were looking at the flight plans of the planes, and you could see it's really in front of us, let's say from east to west, but from left to right. But now, like, we're on this hill, it's dark out. So we're like a few minutes after 11 p.m. and there's this light on the horizon that's coming directly toward us. And within a minute, it was overhead. So that's far away. And within a minute, it's overhead. And what we realized when it got overhead, it had three little white lights in a triangle. And in the center of the triangle, a really huge red light. But the thing is that I wasn't expecting is during that entire time, we were hearing afterburners. And some of the guys said, that's not like a normal plane type of engine. That's different. And the fact that that thing came over us at 11:11 was a bit weird, because by the time it went over us, it was about like 11:12. So that's when I looked at my watch and said, okay, it's probably 11:11. So that's why I was asking, because I've never heard of like UFOs having like afterburners. So it's clearly could have been like our technology, perhaps. So
yeah, I think we do have this technology and are flying it around. And the TR3B is a good example.
Okay.
And I worry about it, because I've been told by people who are in a position to know that some of what people are seeing, particularly around military bases like Area 51 or Edwards, or really any Air Force base, is in fact our own.
Okay. Now you've written one of your books was called UFO Healing, so that really touched home. And do you have any more stories in your book regarding ET healings?
Oh yeah, I run into this fairly regularly. So pretty much all the books I've written about people who are having contact have some healing cases in them. But yeah, that was actually the first book I wrote, was about healing cases in 1996. I had 100 cases. And it went out of print, and I kept getting more cases. So I put out a new edition, The Healing Power of UFOs. And it has 300 cases.
Wow.
And I used to think it was rare. I have reversed my opinions. Some people think it's as high as 50% of cases. I'm going to probably push that down a little bit, just in my own experience. But absolutely, there's a lot. Bud Hopkins had cases. He never wrote about them, but I cornered him at a UFO convention. I'm like, Bud, do you get healing cases or don't you? And he said, yes, we do. And he's very encouraged by them, but he doesn't know quite what to make of them, because some abductees aren't being healed and others are. And every major researcher that I've looked into has cases. David Jacobs has many. John Mack, Barbara Lamb, Edith Fiore. She says half of the people she interviewed had reported healing cases. And they cover everything from cuts and bruises, broken bones, burns, stomach aches. I've got like 15 cases of people who had back pain cured, eye problems, serious illnesses like tuberculosis, diphtheria, diabetes, liver disease, kidney stones, gallbladders, tumors of all kinds, 30 plus cases of people cured of cancer. I mean, you name it. One lady I talked to, she was suffering from glaucoma, had an experience with these praying mantis type ETs. Her husband was a contactee, and he saw praying mantis, and they were out camping in their forests behind their home in, I think it was Maine. And she woke up unable to move, and she could hear this insect like chattering in the tent, and this powerful beam or energy beam going into her head. And her vision seemed better, and she went to her ophthalmologist. She has glaucoma pretty bad. Ophthalmologist was stunned because her optic nerve, which had been thinning really bad, had grown to almost twice its normal thickness. And she still, suffered from some glaucoma, but they sure did improve it.
Wow. Oh, there's Chris Bledsoe, which is just somewhat, quite known as a healing event. I had Ron Johnson on. I think he had a mantid thrust his hand through his back. I think Ron had hernias. So that's my dad had hernias, and he had one of his vertebrae were actually like broken, so down the middle. So I know it's fairly painful, and his back was cured. So, but hearing David Jacobs, coming from that man to say that he has cases of ET healings, but he's so negative about them.
Yeah, I think there's a tendency for people and some researchers to view this phenomena through the lens of fear, because we've been trained that way. Stranger danger, anything that looks different is evil.
Kill it.
Yeah. And fear sells, and all the horror movies, and I remember when I got involved in this field, I was horrified. I'm like, oh my God, people are being kidnapped. It's against their will. They're being experimented on by bug-like aliens. Humanity is in trouble. And I really had to step back and look at these cases objectively and throw away my belief system and just look at the facts. And that's when I got a real wake-up call. The worst thing people report, certainly in my own files, I'm not going to say that some people don't have negative encounters, because they do. And yes, there is a lot of fear surrounding the subject, and it can be extremely traumatic to be pulled onto a UFO and physically examined. But that's the worst that I hear. It's like this people, being pulled onto a UFO, and they're undressed and examined, and they're unable to move, and they're fighting it the whole way. They're like, no. But this is often when healing occurs, and that is a primary mission on part of the ETs, is healing people. And that's the scariest part of an encounter, because sometimes it is painful. And if someone is scared and they're in pain and they're seeing something very different, I think they can easily come to the conclusion that this is evil, this is bad, I don't like it. And this is often how contact will start. People are really scared. But that's the worst of it. And if you do not have a strong fear reaction, and I see this over and over and over again, the ETs don't paralyze you. They don't suppress your memories. They will explain to you what's happening. We are physically examining you. We're measuring you for pollution. You have a medical problem. We will heal you. And then they will give you a tour of the craft. Honest to God, this is common. They will show you the engine room, tell you how it works in detail. They will take you to the control room, the helm, and say, here's how we fly. Would you like to try it? And I have case after case after case of this. They will give you messages. We were talking about a bit before the show about, do the ETs have any, prophecies or warnings? And yes, they do. And it's very consistent, and it has been since day one, since the 1950s contact era, all the way through the whole abduction by grays, all the way to the present day. I don't care what kind of ET you're talking to, whether it's a human looking or a praying mantis or a gray or a strange humanoid, or the message is almost always the same. And primarily it's warnings against nuclear proliferation. It's warning against our warlike ways. It's warnings against pollution, environmental destruction, chopping down the forests, This is the number one message. They're like, why are you destroying your planet? Don't you see what will happen? One guy was told, since you started exploding nuclear bombs, you started a countdown clock. Because of this, all these disasters will happen, and you cannot stop them. And they showed him hurricanes after hurricane after hurricane, mostly tornadoes, earthquakes, mudslides. They said, this is going to happen. You can't stop this. You need to know. And it's come true. Absolutely has come true. One lady was taken on board and they said, you need to tell people to stop putting out the greed and negativity you're putting out, because you will destroy your planet like we did. You are on that pathway. If you think Hurricane Katrina was bad, you haven't seen anything yet. And that turned out to be true. So this is something they tell people over and over again. And they tell people to wake up. We have boosted your psychic abilities. This is our gift to you. I hear that over and over again.
Really?
And people come away from their encounters spiritually transformed. They can start doing astral travel. I wonder about that. They can, have precognition. They start channeling. Hands-on healing. That's so common. People have the ability to do healing. All these really amazing, levitation, physical levitation. Contactees have levitated following their experiences. Happened to Stephen Greer, happened to Whitley Strieber, happened to Dolly, that lady I mentioned. She's the subject of my next book, by the way.
Really?
She's a full-on conscious contactee. Amazing story.
So one book dedicated to Dolly.
Yep.
Okay, amazing. Wow.
Yeah. So there's a very strong spiritual component to all of this that's been largely overlooked by the nuts and bolts folks which I get, they want to prove this is a real phenomena. But you only have to research this stuff for 15 minutes before you realize there's something to it.
Bingo.
Seriously, skeptics do not have a leg to stand on. They are ignorant and have not done their homework. If you come away from actually examining this evidence objectively, I don't see how you can come away unconvinced.
I don't.
I really don't.
Let me see. Do ETs ever leave strange marks on people's bodies? I know there's a lot of things regarding scratches, scoop marks. Any more of that coming info?
Yeah, that's fairly regular. I hear that all the time. Scoop marks in particular, scratches, bruises, puncture wounds, these sort of things are fairly common. And I think are probably caused by a couple of things. Medical procedures, what we might look at as inoculations or implants. And implants got a real bad rap in this field. It's like, mind control, tracking. No. If people have been told what these implants are for, specifically they asked, and the EC said it's to measure the levels of pollution in your body. One lady was told. Another was told it's to monitor your health. It's to boost your immune system. It's all health related. But sometimes people are left with like triangles.
Okay.
And this is something that seems a little bit more beyond that sort of average scoop mark.
Okay.
And sometimes it's more than triangles. It's a weird mark. In this latest book, Wondrous, there's one lady who started having very complex symbols appear on her body. She's like, what the heck? And she's like, because she wasn't even really aware that she was a contactee.
Okay.
She had sightings, and but she didn't think she was a contactee. These symbols start appearing on her body. She's freaking out. So she writes them down, goes to the library and checks out books on symbology. Cannot match them up. They're not Sanskrit. It's not Egyptian hieroglyphics. It's not Chinese or Japanese, but along those lines, really complex symbols of obvious intelligent design. Freaked her out. She went for years searching for answers. And nobody, not her friends, she went to a Masonic temple, no one could figure it out. And finally she's like, fine. They stopped appearing. She wrote them down all in a notebook and just put the notebook in a drawer until it was late 1980s. She's watching TV with her boyfriend, and it was a TV miniseries called Intruders.
Oh, no kidding.
Yeah, by Bud Hopkins, of course. But his book Intruders is all about people who've had contact, and made into this television miniseries, which was actually quite good. One of the few, media projects that's absolutely accurate. I liked Close Encounters of the Third Kind, because that was really close to accurate, though a bit dramatized. Fire in the Sky was great, except for the onboard segment, which was completely false and set back ufology 10 years. Not a lot of really good stuff out there, but Intruders did a great job. And Bud Hopkins was, an on-set consultant and insisted on that everything be accurate. And so they're watching this show, and it's quite interesting. And suddenly there's an onboard segment, and there's symbols on the ship that are on the wall. And Linda is her name, sees the symbols, freaks out, her jaw drops. She gets chills down her spine because this is her symbols. She recognized them as the symbols that were on her body. And her boyfriend turns to her and like, honey, hey, look. Those are your symbols, aren't they? Those are the ones that appeared on your leg. And she's like, yes. So she finally got her answer, or an answer. These were alien symbols. And that's when she started having all these dreams back to childhood, where she remembered meeting ETs face to face, human looking, by the way.
Really?
Yep. What some people call Nordic. I don't like that term.
Yeah.
Because it implies that these are, blonde haired and blue eyed. And some are, but no, they are all races. I've heard them described as looking Middle Eastern, or Mesoamerican, or even Black, African American. They are all different races, Asian appearance, but definitely absolutely human looking, but usually described as 6 to 6.5 feet tall, broad shouldered, muscular, and very genetically perfect looking, really beautiful. And when there's more than one, they often look very similar.
Okay.
Like twins or brothers or sisters. And that was true in her case. She said that they were very fair in her case, very beautiful, human-looking ETs wearing jumpsuits.
Yeah. Now that brings me to the question. I think you talk about blue ETs in your book.
Yes. And in fact, I included my sister-in-law's case, Kisara, who you interviewed, so you may have heard this encounter.
Okay.
So I'll just mention it briefly, because she woke up and saw these blue beings at the foot of her bed. And she didn't see them arrive. She never saw them leave, but they came every night for a period of 2 weeks, at least, when she was about 12 years old. I would stick these rods of light into the soles of her feet, which is so odd, but I know of other cases. She's like, what are you doing? What are you doing? They said, well, we are recording your memories. We're taking your memories. She's like, oh, cool. And they stopped coming, and she was really upset. And it's funny because I've talked to other people who've seen these blue beings. Yeah. Recently, I just interviewed a gentleman from Texas who saw Kisara's drawing and nearly fainted, because that's exactly what they look like. He says it's very accurate, her drawing. And Dolly, that lady who I've mentioned, has seen them. I'm like, can I send you a drawing? And can you tell me if this is at all close? And she's like, yep, that's exactly it. That's exactly what they look like. I'm like, wow, Christy is so good at what she does. And that drawing she drew is 100% accurate. I put it in the book, by the way. It's amazing. They're little blue beings. And according to Dolly, they actually do live on Earth.
Really? Wow.
So they might
Okay.
not be called extraterrestrials, but rather crypto-terrestrials.
Mm. Do you talk about mantids in your book? Because, to me, that's a fascinating subject. And I thought my face was a mantid, or at least insectoid, but I don't know anymore. But
yeah, the mantids are really interesting to me. I get mostly grays, I will say, over half even, or some variation of the grays. There's quite a few different kinds. And a lot of human looking and occasional mantis. Those are the three main kinds, and strange humanoids. But that's a catch-all category with all kinds of beings.
Mhm.
And the mantids are really interesting. And one of really interesting case involves both grays and mantids. And it's this lady from Indiana who took her 14-year-old son to the dentist one day. And the dentist freaks out, calls her in and says, "What's this on this x-ray?" And on the x-ray, underneath the kid's back molar was this brown marble, kind of large BB looking object. Mm-hmm. And he turns to them and says, "Did you shoot yourself in the mouth with a BB gun?" And the kid denied it. He says, "No." And the mom said, "No, that never happened. We would have remembered." No. And they said, "Well, there's an object under the tooth. And there's no entry wound. It's asymptomatic. The tooth is fine, but it's clearly a metallic body." She sent me the x-rays. I put them in the book. I sent them off to a trauma physician and a medical doctor. And they both said the same thing. Like, did he shoot himself in the mouth with the BB gun? And of course I said, no. And besides, look at it again. It's much bigger than a BB. And they're like, "Well, yeah, it is." I'm like, "What is it?" And they said, "Well, we don't know, but it's clearly a foreign body. It's metallic. It's opaque to x-rays. We could not possibly tell you what it is." And she contacted me because she's freaking out. And she took these x-rays home and she's like, "What can this be? What can this be?" And she's going online to look rare medical conditions with, round objects and some. There's no explanation other than alien implant. I mean, it was pretty clear right from the beginning that this was the best explanation that fit the evidence. So she contacts me. She, heard me on the radio, saw my website, and I started asking her questions. I'm like, "Okay, let's dig into this a little deeper. Have you ever seen a UFO? Has your son?" She said, "No." "Nope, I haven't, and he hasn't." I'm like, "Really? Are you sure?" She's like, "I'm sure." I'm like, "Have you ever had any weird dreams?" She did. She did have some weird dreams that I think were alien related. And he was very interested in Nordic ETs as well. I'm like, "Are you sure he's never seen a UFO?" And she's like, "No, he would have told me." I'm like, "Well, maybe just ask him again." Because he didn't want to talk to me. He was very shy and, just 14 years old. I get it. But he was there in the room. I could hear him. And she's like, "Honey, have you ever seen a UFO?" And he's like, "Yeah, Mom, I didn't want to tell you." And she's like, "Why not?" He's like, "I didn't want to scare you." She's like, "What did you see, honey?" And he described how he was outside his home with his best friend. And this light dropped down overhead and started flashing colored lights at them. It was very low. They ran home. They have no memory of missing time, but I suspect that it may have happened. So that's how it all kind of began for them. And then they kept going back to the dentist. This implant was always there. And he's super psychic, by the way. The kid is like a major clairvoyant, which is a huge clue. They love psychic people. I think he's going to do important work. This is the kind of people who get contacted.
Okay.
So at any rate, she calls me up like 2 years later or a year. She's like, "Preston, you're never going to believe it. They came last night." I'm like, "Who came?" She's like, the Greys. I'm like, "Wow, what happened?" And she says, "Well, my son came into sleep with me because he was nervous, about sleeping alone," which happens with contactees. And it's just her and her son alone in the world. She's adopted.
Oh.
She's a single parent. So they're having a bit of a hard time. He's very shy. At any rate, she wakes up and sees grays. The room fills with light. A gray is standing by the doorway. A couple of grays are hovering over her son, working on him. And she looks at the gray at the doorway, and he comes up to the doorknob in height, so 3-4 feet tall. And he says, everything's fine. You don't need to worry. Everything's going to be just fine. It's okay. You don't need to be afraid. Everything's fine. And he repeated it. She said about 50 times, just reassuring her with that, short variations of that phrase. And finally, she just laid back, and she did not see them leave, but woke up the next morning and told him, like, they came, honey. And he says, they came for you? And she's like, no, honey, they came for you. He's like, oh, I wonder if my implant's still there. And they went back to the dentist 3 weeks later, and it was. So she calls me back later, and she says, I had another one, and it's a weird one. Are you sitting down? I'm like, yeah. Tell me. She says, well, I found myself on board a UFO. And it was weird because it looked like my living room. I'm like, what do you mean? She's like, well, there was a carpet, there was a couch, a flat screen TV, a lamp. But the walls were rounded. There was a weird door. I'm like, wow. She says, I think they dressed it up to look like that. And I'm kind of nodding to myself because I've heard this before. They have really advanced technology and will do whatever it takes to reassure a witness. Their ships can change shape. They can change size. They can expand and contract. They can do all kinds of stuff. And they will do, they can pull chairs out of the floor. I mean, they can do things. And there was another man sitting on this couch, a young man. She didn't know him. And she's like, hey, how are you? You're having contact too? And he's like, yeah, are you? And she's like, yeah. And they're a little bit calm, considering what's going on. And suddenly the door swishes open. And she says, oh my God, it was a 9-foot tall figure. And it was a praying mantis. And he was gray, and walks up to her, walks up to the guy first. And she says she wasn't scared really, but it was startling. Walks up to the guy, it's holding like a cell phone or something, and puts it up against his neck, doing some sort of procedure. She wasn't sure. Then he turns to her and like, it's your turn. And she stands up and says, nope, 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 nope. And that's all she remembers.
Really? He got ticked off because she got up.
I guess, well, I mean, she doesn't know what happened next.
Okay. Wow.
But yeah, that's what, and then, can I tell another case?
Yeah. I'm enjoying this. I'm enjoying.
Because this one is so cool. I gave it the first chapter in the book.
Okay.
Because this lady, a teacher, and she was such a delight to interview, because some people are, I won't call them hostile witnesses, but they just don't give a good interview. You have to, it's like pulling teeth. And she was super well educated, very outgoing, super nice, and just intelligent, and had this experience in 1996. She goes jogging each morning outside her home in O'Fallon, Illinois, her former home, and woke up at 4:30 a.m. like she always does, and went jogging with her dog. That's early, man. I could never. But so she jogs down her street, goes up another street, a third street, and is heading down this street to Kyle Road, which is the T intersection right in front of her. And her dog stops and looks up ahead of her. She's thinking, oh, it's going to be a deer or a raccoon or a fox, because the neighborhood where she lived in O'Fallon, Illinois, was very rural. It was a farming community. And she's passing by the high school on her left, and she's about 100 feet away from the T intersection when she sees, and her dog sees, what appears to be a man on stilts walking down the center of Kyle Road. This is a fairly busy road during the day, not at this hour. And it walks right under the street light, right under it.
Okay.
And she can see exactly what this is now. And it's not a man on stilts. She thought maybe it had extenders on his arms too, because his arms were so long. It was a praying mantis, a humanoid praying mantis. And she says, Preston, it was 15 feet tall.
Oh my God.
And I'm like, 15,
Oh my,
wow.
15.
Yeah, because normally I hear like 8, 9, 10 feet tall. That's what I usually hear. I do have one case involving a 15-foot tall praying mantis, which I wrote about in another book. And that's why she contacted me, because she could not find any other accounts.
Okay.
But she found one in my book. And she's like, I have another case for you. And she says it was booking it down the street. I mean, taking big 6, 10-foot strides down Kyle Road, walking fairly quickly. And its head was pointed down. It had a huge triangular head, eyes the size of basketballs, was mottled gray, long stick-like legs. And she knows exactly how tall it was because it walked right under the street light. And afterwards, she went up to the street light and measured it. And its head was pointed down. It was scanning the road back and forth as if looking for its car keys or something. I don't know. But it appeared to be searching for something and did not see her. She doesn't think it saw her and just walks off into the darkness. And kudos to her for not running the other direction and going home. She runs after it. She runs after this thing. I'm like, wow, not sure I would have done that. But she did, and her dog followed. She runs up to the intersection and can see it going off into the darkness, and boom, it turns off into the cornfield. She runs up, but she lost sight of it. I'm like, why was it there? Is there anything in this area? She says, no, there's nothing. There's cornfields. That's it. A high school, homes. I'm like, really? There's nothing in this area that might attract it. She's like, well, there is one thing. And she says, I live about 6 miles, as the UFO flies, away from Scott Air Force Base. I'm like, oh, Scott Air Force Base. And I instantly thought of a case which had occurred some years, like 4 years after hers, in the year 2000, where a bunch of people saw UFO go skirt around Scott Air Force Base, which is exactly where she is. I'm like, wow, maybe there's a connection there. I don't know, but UFOs are absolutely attracted to Air Force bases. And,
so what I guess listening to you, what I'm thinking is that your book is really amazing. You've got really good stories on this, and we haven't even scratched the surface to what you've been talking about. I'd like to finish this off. I'd like to ask you a personal question. My new girlfriend and I, we might have been abducted in 2018. We had the same event. I was at the hotel. She was at her parents' house. We had the same event happen to us during the same wee hours in the morning, where we felt we were being moved around on the bed, and but I felt I was gliding on the bed. I was being moved around, but as soon as I thought I was being abducted by Grace. That's what I thought. So I telepathically I sent love to them, and as soon as it did that, I started hearing high-pitched screeches. So imagine like a banshee, what you think a banshee would scream like in the movies, but both of us heard the same thing. I heard it twice. She heard it 3 times. In your research, did you hear about stories that might have been similar?
Yeah, absolutely. A number of similarities there. Feeling like you're, floating above the bed or being moved around. It's often when a person is taken or being put back, and people who are in separate areas having encounters at the same time who are related is, I won't say common, but it certainly turns up. Okay. I think it's the ET's way of letting you know that this is real, or perhaps because they're working with people who are related to each other and they want to bring you together for whatever reason.
Mm.
And the screeching, yeah, this is how they talk sometimes. It can be a very high-pitched, squeaky, screechy sound.
Amazing.
Um,
Okay.
So yeah, I'm going to say yes, yes, and yes. I have heard that before,
Okay.
absolutely.
Yeah,
It's
that was a
weird.
first. Yeah.
I've got a lot of cases of people at hotel rooms. Seems like an odd place to like, okay, he's out in a hotel. Let's get him now. Like, really? At a hotel?
Yeah.
So strange.
Well, we were meeting up. She has like third eye visions in the morning on waking. That's about it. But she's got a lot of visions where she sees grays playing around with wands, reptilians looking at her, or she's got these visions of them in the bedroom, just pulling drawers and looking at stuff. And so we met up finally for breakfast, and we've been dating ever since. So that reminded me of a researcher contactee. I think she wrote the book called Love Bite. So that's what I thought. Do ETs plan these things out in advance and make people come together? I think so.
Yep, I've got 4 cases like that in this latest book.
Imagine
But
that.
it's like an ET dating service. They will bring you together. A guy from Montana and a lady from Nevada. What are the chances? A guy from Utah and a lady in a foreign country. A guy from Florida and a girl from California. And my brother and my sister-in-law.
True. Okay. No, that's crazy. So, yeah, we could always call it a night. We've been at this for a while, and I really hope people will get the chance to order your book on Amazon.
That's right. Online retailers have a website too. Got a YouTube channel. I'm on Facebook, Twitter.
So if people want to get into contact with you, do they go through your website?
Yeah, that would be the easiest way. Yep.
Okay.
Facebook is fine too.
Okay. So huge thanks for coming on. I really had loads of fun tonight. I learned a lot. I enjoyed it a lot. And I've listened to a lot of your interviews in the past, but having you in front of me is, in all honesty, you're one of the researchers that I think is at least one of the best out there. You're less of like an egotistical type of person. You're really down to earth. You bring the stories how they are. You don't seem to be like an ego-driven type of person, and that really connects with me because a lot of people just want to have their faces out there, but you're really bringing the story out there instead, and really, that whole thing really resonates with me. And so I really thank you for your service to humanity. Thank you a lot for agreeing to come on tonight.
Oh, shucks. You're making me blush. Thanks. Yeah, it was a blast. I had a lot of fun talking with you. I really appreciate it.
Thank you. And to those watching, hope you enjoyed today's show. More interviews coming up, and I'll see you guys next time. So take care, everyone. Hello, everyone. This is Mr. Gray, and thanks for watching today's episode. If you are an abductee, contactee, or experiencer, and you believe that your story could help others, please feel free to contact me through my YouTube channel email. When it comes to experiencers, the ET phenomena, and the future, remember, truth will out.